Actors need to think about how to communicate visually with their audience. It's fine to use words, but words themselves don't necessarily have meaning, whether in spoken or in signed language. So, because words don't have meaning, my approach is to work with intention and really explore meaning so that their thoughts can be expressed through action or a physical response, through a visual expression. It's a very natural, organic process, a natural way to communicate visually. I was actually born in a rural village in southern India. I grew up there. My sister and I were both deaf. Because there was no access to good education for deaf children, my parents started to consider moving to somewhere that did. Singapore has an excellent school, so ultimately we moved. My sister and I both use American Sign Language, and she picked up a little bit of spoken Tamil as well. She was good at that. Me, not so much. But that meant that the dinner table was an interesting place in terms of communication. Using English, gestures, a bit of Tamil, our own unique family blend. Singapore also had a deaf theatre, and I was fascinated by it when I was growing up, partly because they communicated so visually. Singapore has a really diverse audience makeup, including people from India, China, and the Malay community, a really mixed audience drawn from every race and culture. That's very much Singaporean culture. But it meant that an audience like that could really enjoy the way deaf theatre performers worked so visually. As for me, I was hooked. I'd found theatre and I wanted to be a part of it. Scottish people are really welcoming people. They're a breath of fresh air as well as diverse, and I was looking for that. At first, I was the only deaf professional performer here, so it was a bit lonely and quite daunting. At that time, deaf performers were leaving in droves to work in London, and people were encouraging me to do the same because there were opportunities there, but I really wanted to stay in Scotland. That wasn't without its challenges, but it could be very exciting as well. So, I got to work. I met with a lot of hearing theatre companies, made sure that my work was being discussed, and opened up that dialogue with them. And over time, that began to bear fruit. I see the power that theatre as a language has, and how people use that to communicate is something that really influences me. My main drive is to communicate in a universal way, and the how of that is the challenge that excites me. When I go to the theatre, whether it's a play or a film or a piece of dance, and I'm sitting in these kinds of seats next to other people, their language may be different to my own, but we're both watching the same thing. And it doesn't matter if we're deaf or hearing. The point is that we're both engaging with the performance that we're seeing on the screen or the stage. And we're both understanding it and able to have a discussion about it regardless of our language. And that's it. That's the kind of work I want to make. Exactly the kind of work I want to make. Ali the Magic Elf is a show that's been created for children between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. this morning's rehearsal, we've been working on the chaos scene and trying to tighten that up with the line changes I think we have. So there's quite a bit of back and forth about how all that fits together. Of course, because I'm deaf and the other two actors are hearing, I'm watching all that go on and then figuring out where the visual cues will sit for me.
Ramesh has got a lot of routines to do in it, which have various sequences, and it's getting those sequences right and in the right order. Sometimes there's a moment when there's complete mayhem happening, and it looks completely chaotic, but that must be actually be choreographed to some extent so that it's always in the same order of things happening. Should we just do that again? Yeah. No, it'll just be the.
Off Kilter is a really simple story, but it's also dark and complex. It explores mental health and that feeling of being different to everyone else, or simply not feeling like yourself. It's an exploration of identity, really. So, Joe Kilter is our character, and we see him at home getting ready to go to work as usual when he unexpectedly receives a letter. And the letter tells him that he's been fired. After 18 years of dedicated work, he gets fired. In that moment, his world shifts, and we see his home physically shift too. He's off his game. He is off kilter. Because the piece was a dark comedy, it came to me that I needed a way to play with the audience's mind. So I added the visual element of illusion, sleight of hand. After a bit of search, I found Kevin McMahon, who is one of the best in the business and incredibly skilled. The director Andy Arnold, Kevin and I then sat down to explore the way that illusion could be used in the piece. Initially, the plans grew arms and legs, but over time, we found that it was the small, subtle illusions that worked best, that reinforced the character and the theme of mental health. The reaction to the show has been different in the UK and Singapore, and we really saw that in the post-show discussions. Here in the UK, mental health is a subject that is publicly discussed, so we've been exposed to it, but for people living in Singapore, it's still something that isn't talked about openly. Because Off Kilter is a piece that is looking at mental health, the audience in Singapore were a bit confused, not sure whether it was something that was important enough to talk about in the theatre. At the post-show discussion one night, there was a white American man who raised his hand and said that the piece had really resonated with him because he had been through a very similar experience. He felt that we'd really captured that experience. That was interesting to me, but for the mainly Asian audience, it was a strong statement, and I'm grateful to that man's openness and honesty and for sparking a discussion. It's exactly what I want, for the subject of mental health to be something we can talk about publicly, not just in hushed tones. I really want to see more deaf theatre makers working in Scotland, more deaf directors too. And I want to see venues and programmers being more open and welcoming to deaf actors. And working with deaf theatre makers so that we can all collaborate to make performances, rather than the way it is now, where we are artificially kept separate. We need to give people opportunities. When I look back to 10 or 14 years ago, the situation has improved, but I feel it's still a work in progress, if I can call it that. So we still need to be throwing open those doors and giving people opportunities. It just has to be done. Deaf children don't really have access to theatre yet. Hearing children can go to any venue, any performance whenever they want, and be exposed to all this great stuff at festivals and shows. Deaf children encounter barriers to that every step of the way. There may be no British Sign Language interpreter or no subtitles, which means we still have to work on getting access in place so that deaf children can be there too, because it's really important for them to have that. So we need to do the work and to keep doing the work because we're not there yet.